Hey guys, okay, this must be the 20th time I'm recording this. I hope 20th time's the charm. My videos are just being way too long. I think I like explaining things as if the person listening were stupid, so I'm just going to assume that you're a bit smarter than what I assumed you were before. So we're just going to get right to it. We're going to start with time complexity, and we're just iterating down our checklist. So we're just kind of checking out what's in our checklist, and we're going to circle it in our dummy function here, which doesn't really do much of anything. So don't pay attention to its functionality, especially don't pay attention to that stupid little semicolon I put there out of habit when this is supposed to be pseudocode. Yeah, we're just counting stuff for the sake of complexity. So let's get cracking. First thing I see here is an operation. So I'm going to circle that in orange. Now, if you were to call some func inside of main or inside of another function or something like that, this stuff in orange will only get executed once. So when we have that, we call it constant complexity because it's not repeating. It's only happening once. So if we were to put that in big O notation, it would be linear big O or constant big O. So we can write it as O of 1. Now the for loop is a different story. We're going to circle that in purple because the for loop happens n amount of times. The n really just means a variable amount of times. It's repeating over itself over and over and over and over. We don't really know how many times, so we're going to just say that it repeats n times. Now there's stuff inside this for loop that we also have to count. So in our checklist we have function calls to the outside. Oh, we have a function call to the outside right here, to some other, which is just some mystery function. Here we have an assignment, which we do not count. Some people count assignments. For what we learned in lecture, we don't count assignments, I believe. So we're just going to leave that out. Even if we did count assignments, our answer at the end will be the exact same. For some functions it may not be, but for this one it will be the exact same. So y++ is an operation. It's just y equals y plus 1, which is an operation, obviously, so we're going to count that as well. So now we're going to label stuff. I'm going to call that A. I'm going to call that B. I'm going to call that C. I'm going to call that D. So now we're going to write this out in an equation. It's going to do A plus NB plus NC plus ND. Remember, the purple stuff happens n amount of times, so we have to say B happens n amount of times, so really it's just n times B. C happens n amount of times, so it's n times C, etc. And this is all plus because it's all kind of in sequence. So we have A happening, and then we have NB, and then we have NC, and then we have ND. So really, we're adding all the instructions together, and they're happening in sequence. But we can factor out the n here, make this a little bit simpler. So we can say n plus, or A plus n, B plus C plus D. And now we're going to simplify this even further. We're just going to group up our constants into kind of arbitrary constant variables. That's a k. That does, oh god, I'm just making it worse. Okay, we're going to group our orange into k1. So if we had more orange variables happening, if we had like an orange B or something like that, then it would too be grouped into k1. That does not look like a k1. That's really frustrating. My tablet's super old. Okay, that's a little bit better, not really. Okay, so now we have crap, I changed the color for some reason. K1 plus, this is why my videos take so long. K2, I'm just so disorganized. So we grouped A into K1, we grouped B plus C plus D into K2, and so now we have K1 plus N times K2. So K2 happens n amount of times. K1, again, is just constant time of O of 1. So we leave it as is. But we can actually take this a step further. We can look at n times K2, and as n times K2 gets bigger as this increases, we stop caring about k2. It becomes kind of insignificant. So as n gets larger and larger and larger and larger because it increments, because it's the for loop that occurs a variable amount of times. As it increases, we stop caring about k2. So it's the same thing when we end up with our result of k1 plus n. It's the same thing here. As this little equation increases, as this goes up in size, we stop caring about the k1, so we're just left with n, which means that our answer here for time complexity is just on. So you make up your little equation, you simplify it down as much as you can, and then you take what you have left and you pop it into a big O function. So a few examples of big O would be O of 1, which we saw with our orange stuff. You can have O of n, you can have O of n2, n squared. This would happen if we had another for loop in here. So that means that we have our first for loop happening n amount of times, and then another for loop happening, let's say j amount of times. So when you mix them together, you have stuff happening n times, and then you have stuff happening j times. You can mix it all together into one iterative variable, but then you end up with n times n, which is n squared. Now, some tricky ones. We have n log n. This generally, very generally, happens in divide and conquer methods for like recursion and stuff like that. So that's when you're taking a really big problem, you're chopping it up into really small problems, and you're taking them on individually. The reason why it's log n is because you're not taking on every single little kind of chopped up piece of the bigger problem. Because that would be on or on squared. So you're not actually completing every single piece of the problem, which means that it's smaller than n but not quite constant, which means that it can be log n, and I believe if you have something similar to that, you'll end up with n log n as well, but I'm not too familiar with n log n. So I'm going to pause the video here, I'll clear this up a little bit, and we'll start on space complexity. Okay, space complexity. So we're going to look at variables, data structures, allocations, and the function call. Notice it's not function calls to the outside, it's just the function call. So we're going to take a little brush and we're going to circle this because that's our function call. It's the function call. So we have to circle that. We have to circle our argument. So we're doing this because space complexity, we're just looking at everything that will take up memory when we run this function. So the function call itself will take memory when we call it. We have an argument here that will take memory to use. And then we have declarations here. We don't count operations because we've already set the memory here in our declaration. So we don't have to count the operation even though y changes. Now here we don't count the for loop itself, but we will put it in a square to depict that things are still happening n times inside this box. So for us right now, it's only this declaration that we care about. So now we're going to do the same thing that we did before, where we make our little equation. I'm not going to re-explain this, just because it's the same thing as with time complexity. And I've already factored out the n here, really just because we already have our declaration. So I forgot to label these. I'm just going to label these real quick just for the sake of clarity. Okay, so the orange stuff is once again constant, it's linear. So we're going to group those, call that K1. And we're going to group, wow, that did not happen as planned. Oh my god, my goddamn tablet. I messed up again. Okay, I'm going to lose track of everything again. Now I have to record the video again for the 21st time. I don't want to do that. I'm so sick of this. Alright, so we end up with K1 plus NK2. So this looks really similar to our little equation for time complexity. And again, as NK2 gets bigger, we forget about K2. And as K1 plus N gets bigger, we forget about K1. So we end up with n, which means that our space complexity is just O to the n, or O of n rather. So don't be mistaken, even though our time complexity and our space complexity for this function are the same, they're not always the same. I could change a couple things in here which would change our answer overall. If I took out this declaration right here, I'm just going to cross this out for the sake of argument. If we took that out, then nothing requiring space happens within this for loop. We just don't count it. We don't need it anymore. So then we would actually have an O of 1 space complex function, because nothing's happening that requires our attention in the for loop anymore. Sure, we'll have still O(n) time complexity, but our space complexity will only be O1 because now we're only counting the orange stuff. We don't have any purple things to count anymore. So anyway, I hope that helps. I may not have been super clear on a few things. I may make a second part to this video. I'm not sure about that yet. But anyway, I do hope it helped out. If you have suggestions for other videos, feel free to post in the comments. And yeah, just thanks for watching, and good luck with your studies.